All right, so this is coping with other people's code. Like Felix said, I'm Laura Savino. I work on the Adobe Photoshop team. I'm based in Seattle, and I'm really excited to be here for my first ACCU. And I'm gonna start, thank you. I'm gonna start with a story about my house. I live in a small craftsman house that was built in the 1920s, and I know that we're here in Bristol, which is a 1,000-year-old city, give or take. So, but just believe me that a 100-year-old house in the States is old and it's very inconvenient, always needs repairs. A few years ago, when we first moved in, it was peeling badly. It was shedding these layers and layers of bright yellow, ever so slightly sweet paint chips. Why would paint be sweet? Because one of these layers of paint laid down some 50 years ago was a high-quality paint known for its durability, whose magic ingredient was the sweet-tasting additive lead. And we were moving in with a 1-year-old, so this would be like a neurotoxic gingerbread house. And so the lead had to go immediately. Replacing the siding boards was technically an option, but in the Pacific Northwest of the states where we live, we are known for cedar forests. We're known for cedar forests. The cedar is in our houses now. It's got these really, it's a really tight grain, incredibly durable wood, especially the old growth bits. So replacing the boards, we could do it, but it would require a lot of money and a more kind of fluid sense of ethics, environmentally speaking, than we were willing to employ. You also can't use a power sander on the lead paint to get it down to the boards, because then you're just creating clouds of toxic dust. So instead, what we did was hire some certified folks to come in and scrape what they could before we, like so many families before us, just painted over the remaining lead. And there's still more work to do in our house, right? Like the kids like to run and slide on the wooden floors, except for one section in the hallway, which is definitely the tiptoe zone because it will give you wicked splinters. I am not asking for home improvement suggestions here. It's just that we could either fix our house or we could live in our house. And this kind of scraping what you can and painting over the rest, it doesn't not apply to a lot of our large old code bases, right? So I love attending conferences in person because this is the connection that gives me hope and inspiration to kind of keep trying new things. It gives me techniques for making compiling faster and smaller and tools for reasoning about abstractions. And I come back from conferences so inspired, like, we can do this. We can do anything. And then I come back to my code base and I'm like, oh, very few of these ideas are gonna work. And sometimes the reasons aren't even technical, right? There's some senior engineer with a lot of power who's just gonna put their foot down and say, no, that's not how we do things here. Sometimes the reasons are legal. I once had an idea for changing a particular configuration mechanism, and one of our principal scientists said, that is a good modification. That is a good modification. But I wonder about some of our support contracts that said that we would keep things the same. And like, I can't make an improvement because we promised umpteen years ago that nothing would change. Like, that's bananas. It's like working up plans for a tree house and then finding out about your local zoning laws and covenants. And so it can be deeply disappointing to go home and realize that so many of the things that you wish would be better are just not gonna change. Maybe someday, but for many code bases and devs, it will not be yet. Okay, so maybe if all this existing code makes it hard to do our favorite best practices, what if we threw it all out? Start fresh in Rust. That was a lot of nods. It can be hard to touch large swaths of a legacy code base without causing near catastrophic bugs, right? And even if you wanted to, there are very few software projects that are so financially solvent that they can let a few of their senior devs take time away from feature making and bug fixing to change the way everything works. So my advice realistically can't be just rewrite it all till you're happy. But you're gonna pick kind of pragmatically which areas to scrape and which to maybe replace at great cost, hopefully without the ethical quandaries and toxic dust clouds. And since saying yes to some things is going to mean saying no to others, you're going to continue to interact with code that you hate. And you'll continue to have feelings about it, which will continue to impact your behavior because being a human is messy. And this triaging, putting things indefinitely into that won't fix state, it is deeply uncomfortable for those of us who pride ourselves on doing good work. Like for me, one of the great pleasures in my life is getting to a table in a cafe, maybe opening my laptop to work, setting down my coffee, and noticing a real wobble in the table, and then ever so casually popping down underneath to twirl down one of the levelers on a leg. And now, I'm not gonna slosh my coffee around, neither is the next person who sits here. It is so good. My fix-it drive is strong. My husband says I have a very particular look on our face when we're having a conversation, maybe on a date in a nice restaurant, and I notice something external to the conversation that I feel a great personal burden to fix. Once I actually leapt up away from the table, out the restaurant door, caught up to a family's car because they had left the pram on the sidewalk. I like to think they still think about me sometimes. But I've had to start triaging my fix-it response, right? Like, I saw a plastic bag blowing down a busy street in my neighborhood and thought, nope, I'm gonna let that go, because I am carrying a baby. And that is where this talk is coming from. You want to make things better, you have the skills to make things better, but sometimes you are also carrying a baby. Do not drop the baby to chase a stray problem, even when the problem looks like it has an obvious solution. So to feel more or less okay about the code base where I live, where I haven't even contributed 0.1% of the lines of code, I have had to adopt a dozen different coping strategies, some of which are actually backed by research, which I will share with you, but all of which I've personally found helpful, because this is gonna come up for your whole career. Our computer programming education and interview processes, they almost exclusively focus on coming up with your own solutions to problems, right? But then you get on the job and you find out a lot of it is dealing with whatever layered structures came before. And sometimes what used to be the good stuff we've since learned has neurotoxins. Now, I'm gonna present various emotions that coding throws at us as a bit of a career arc, but it's more of a frequency table, because yes, you're more likely to be worried about your capabilities in the beginning of your career, and you're more likely to be annoyed at the ignorant turkeys who wrote the code towards the end. But honestly, if you're super senior and you haven't even remotely doubted your abilities in the past month, I would argue you're not being challenged enough, or you need to dial down the hubris. And if you're super new to coding and you've literally never seen code that made you go, what were they thinking? You need to get out and read more code, because there is atrocious code that is propping up billion-dollar industries, because, you know, as people say, there is nothing so permanent as a temporary hack that really kind of works. So let's get into the arc. Starting off, if your brain never pulls this kind of crap with you, good, but for the rest of us, we have to fight this kind of attack. It's a really nasty one that's coming from like inside the house, right? And for me, I found an unexpected mindset shift that makes all the difference when my brain is pulling that, oh no, am I too stupid for this code? Am I too stupid for this job, for this industry? Like, I can really spiral. So I don't try to argue with my brain. It has a strong recency bias, like all brains, and right now it's got a bunch of data points showing I am not currently capable of doing this task. So I stop arguing. Okay, sure, I'm too dumb to understand this code. Fine, I would like to keep my job though, so what should someone too dumb to understand this code do next? And that's when I get ideas that can actually change the situation. Maybe I watch a tutorial video all the way through, even if I already know everything that they're saying in the first 3 minutes. Or I ask a colleague for help sooner than I otherwise would. Or totally reframe and acknowledge that, you know what, yes, this code is too dense for me to understand. But you know, I'm not significantly dumber than the average software dev, right? If I'm having trouble understanding this, someone else on the team will too. So this code desperately needs a comment. I'll write one and ask for an edit from the original author because we all know the fastest way to get feedback from a busy person who is opinionated is to show them some potentially permanent statement that maybe has some inaccuracies. So this, fine, what should I do next, is an actionable thought while having a feeling that can derail your afternoon or your week. Sorry, boss. Instead of spending a bunch of energy trying to believe, like, I think I can, just, you know what, I clearly cannot right now. So what needs to change so I can take that next step and another? Figuring out how to get what I want in spite of it all is a superpowered mindset shift. Another question that especially hits folks in their early career, especially folks who have a different background from other people on their team, is one of belonging. Even very senior engineers can feel this, especially maybe in new environments, like a massive conference in a different country and you're far from home. That it's something that I really appreciate about ACCU specifically, actually, is our code of conduct includes this really welcoming bit of advice. Tamping down the surprise, making it safe to say, so who's Sean Parent? Lets people know they don't have to be fully steeped in the community lore in order to sit and chat at your table. This sense of belonging, though, it can seem like a nice to have, right? Like, we're not in grammar school here. I don't need to be liked to sling code. Maybe. So Dr. Kat Hicks is a researcher with the Developer Success Labs whose writing on developer thriving is critical reading for developers and especially applicable to a conference on professionalism in software development. She mentions this about the predictive value of belonging. If we don't feel like we belong, we tend to drop these behaviors that are existentially important for a living code base. And I'm emphasizing the importance for the code base here because I know for some people, if it's not in monospaced font, they don't care, right? Like, my job is coding, this is not code, therefore it does not apply. So, hi. I just want to say really clearly, you and your colleagues' sense of belonging has a concrete relationship to long-term code health. Because our beliefs in our belonging can impact our behavior in ways that impact our relationships, which does impact outcomes. Sometimes we think that something being particularly hard for us means that we don't belong. Like, look at all these people casually just making the future of programming languages. I think everyone here was in Tokyo together last week. But it's fine, I can roll. But these authors, in their belonging research, found that understanding everyday adversities as normal challenges that can be overcome can help someone stay engaged in a way that lets them build relationships that will contribute to their success. I was telling a non-programmer friend about how much I was struggling with this third-party library that some goon had decided to add to our code base, and it was me, I was the goon. But other people made it like proliferate, and I didn't really grok its conventions well enough to be genuinely productive. So my friend asked me how much time my team was giving me during the workday to ramp up on this tool. And like, this wasn't a tool to me. This was a way of being. It was a paradigm shift based on identity, written and contributed to, by the way, by a couple of devs who had at one point been personally unpleasant to me. I couldn't take a day or two off to like train myself up in a paradigm shift. I'd need 40 days in a desert, maybe some psilocybin. And this was a sign. It was a sign that I was not one of them. My brain didn't automatically work that way. Why bother trying? People either understand it, love it, contribute back to the framework, or they don't. And I knew if I asked too many questions, like my real questions, not subtleties of application, but like, no, really, how does this work and why? Why do we care? It would further cement everyone's decision that I was not one of them. So you can see how the cycle perpetuates. But if I'd had someone that I was comfortable asking my really basic questions of, I know I could have worked through those challenges. I've done hard things. I learned to program a dozen or so years ago now. I went from here's an if statement to let's balance a red-black tree in like 6 months. For this new tool, though, I didn't have anyone who liked me and could meet me where I was. So this is the advice that I give to interns and new college grads. Identify the person that you can ask your stupidest questions of, and then use that ladder to get up to the next level and leave the ladder there for the people who are coming after you. One of my mentors at work, he always manages to weave into conversations. You know, Laura, 10 years from now, when you're the one giving advice to noobs on the Photoshop team, or hey, that follow-up you did there, that was architect-level behavior. These are constant reminders that someone with institutional power thinks I belong. He's left the ladder in place. So I hope that you're so lucky that you have someone in your corner like that. Cultivate those relationships, because those will keep you around through times of real doubt. Experts don't just slowly suffer through hard problems till they get to the other side, though. They also employ a wide variety of behaviors that get them unstuck faster. This is a bit I heard a decade ago. It still floors me when I remember it, that a major differentiator between an expert and a novice, or even an intermediate level person, is how effectively the person responds to errors. An expert doesn't not make errors. They don't not encounter deep flaws in the system that can and do trip them up, but they respond effectively. They can investigate and discard 10 hypotheses in the time it takes a newer person to really look into one. You're making mistakes doesn't mean you can't do this. And one way to really solidify for yourself that your struggles to track down some inscrutable bug are not unique and are not intractable is to sit down with someone senior to you and look over their shoulder and work with them on the problem that you're stuck on. Don't let them say, let me just go try a few things and I'll get back to you. No, I want to see you typing. I want to see all of your false starts, because nearly every time this expert will use some tool you weren't familiar with, and they'll take an approach you hadn't thought of by definition, right? Because if you had been familiar with the tool, if you had thought of the approach, you would not have gotten so stuck. And let's say they actually do just start by retreading all the same ground you did. How validating is that, though, to see as a beginner that an extremely senior person also starts by just grepping for the error message, maybe reading it twice. You may even find out that your problem is out of reach, even for this senior person, and now they're going to call in reinforcements. And you get to watch who they call and how they phrase it, too. I had an odd race condition I was debugging one time that I ran all the way up through Adobe's most expert C++ programmers that most of you have told me that you've met. It's really nice. And he ultimately invited me to a channel where I could share a sample project directly with the maintainers of this multi-threading library that was acting up on my hardware. So these are the kinds of behaviors that will take you through to mid-career, which is where most people spend most of their time, just statistically. Mid-career for me honestly started with a lot of frustration. Because by mid-career, you've developed these well-founded judgments and principled stances. You go to conferences, you learn about best practices, you go to conferences, you present about best practices, and all the way, you're still interacting with a bunch of code that's not yours and is not at all up to your standards. And sometimes no one's really doing anything about it. Like you ask around and get, yeah, we can't change that. And part of staying motivated is believing that if you put in some effort, something will happen, right? I worked in an org once that took this to an extreme with the engineering motto that anyone can fix anything. I asked for a splash screen design one time, and I got a PDF of the logo and a crash course in generating background color noise, and not a designer. And it's great to know that you can try to fix things, but the flip side of that is a little bit rude, like sincerely asking for help and being told to read the effing manual. This organization's target audience was high school students in the not too distant past. And when I asked leadership if they would prioritize making their desktop website work on any mobile device, I got, anyone can fix anything. It was so demoralizing, because not anyone can fix anything in anything approaching an appropriate amount of time or effort. I was working as an iOS developer. My web coding was at least 5 years out of date, which meant that I had likely missed the meteoric rise and fall of an entire mainstream JavaScript framework. Being explicitly told that I had the power to fix it was more frustrating, because the website was still not responsive, but somehow I felt like it was my fault. So instead of taking the full weight of responsibility on yourself, I highly recommend adopting some version of the Serenity prayer, which you've likely seen before. Its origins are actually a bit debated, but it's not even that old, only maybe 3 times as old as my code base. People ask for the serenity to accept the things they cannot change, courage to change the things they can, wisdom to know the difference. But we in our jobs, we're dealing with software, right? Like, you can't change that code, says Herb, and no, that's fine, I'll just write a compiler that can. One of my coworkers, I asked him if we'd be able to reconcile these 2 modes of profiling without duplicating work, and he says, of course, it's code. We can make it do whatever we want to. So yeah, I'd tweak this first line to accept the things that I have decided not to change. And this helps me to be okay with choosing an imperfect option. I left the rubbish littering on the road. I held on to the baby. So if you're feeling frustratedly stuck, instead of I keep seeing these patterns, they won't let me change them, try I've chosen not to address them. Which, okay, this is taking ownership of a bad choice, but it's also a little defeatist and a hair cynical. So why? Why aren't you addressing this? You're letting this problem lie. What value of yours is this expressing? Maybe it really matters to a teammate that things stay this way. Maybe it's not worth the risk to QE right now. Maybe it's something as simple as, I just don't want to get into it. Fine. If you get here, I would urge you to keep going to find some positive result, not just the lack of a bad one. I'm not going to get into it because I'm saving my energy for this other thing that I really deeply care about. When I remind myself that I've made an explicit priority decision to gain something, a whole weight just falls off my shoulders. For a real-world, non-code example, we have downspouts from our gutters that end in clay pipes that go into the ground and out to the sewer main. And over the years, they've shifted and clogged, and our front garden started flooding in the Seattle rains right next to our foundation. So I put in a temporary fix of these green perforated plastic extensions that just unroll, direct the water away so our house wouldn't leak. And then I got a quote for what it would cost to actually fix right. And I replaced the bright green, flimsy plastic redirectors with some moderately tasteful, brown, hard plastic redirectors. And now every time I see them, I feel a stab of pride because they're saving me thousands of dollars. So I found a cheap solution that is good enough, and I feel fully triumphant, even though it is the worst technical solution. Also, minor frustration can be a symptom of healthy growth. It often crops up when things are not what you expected. And you know when things are different from what you expect is when you're in a new situation and learning. It is uncomfortable, but if the discomfort stays small, it's not a crisis. The presence of minor frustration is not by itself a signal that anything about your context actually needs to change. Researching this tension, this discomfort versus growth, a point came up that resonated with and surprised me. Life's challenges and resulting distress are not the primary obstacles to well-being. Focusing on escaping these experiences prohibits values-based activity and diminishes well-being over time. I needed to sit with that one for a minute, so I'm gonna give you a breath too. Another framing of this idea from the same article, when it comes to well-being, reducing distress is only really worthwhile when it helps you pursue self-endorsed, meaningful, valued goals. Now notice, they're not saying it doesn't matter if you suffer, so power up, buttercup. No, they're saying notice the suffering and check in. Is it in service of something you value? Now, I want to read you a poem that I loved so much I based passwords off of it for years. Coleman Barks calls this his translation of a Rumi poem. It is not a translation, it is an interpretation. It's like if someone said, I basically manually transpiled this Haskell program into Go. I don't know Haskell like at all, and I'm kind of morally opposed to immutability. It's just how I was raised. But I read a great paper on it, and I put myself in a very functional frame of mind when I composed this. So I still think it's a powerful bit of poetry. I'm just acknowledging up front, this is the docudrama version of what Rumi actually wrote. I'm not gonna paraphrase Mr. Barks, but I am gonna abbreviate a little, and he just gets to deal with that. In Qazvin, they have a custom of tattooing themselves for good luck, with blue ink on the back of the hand, the shoulder, wherever. A certain man goes to his barber and asks to be given a powerful, heroic blue lion on his shoulder blade, and do it with flair. I've got Leo ascending, I want plenty of blue. But as soon as the needle starts pricking, he howls. What are you doing? The lion. Well, which limb did you start with? I began with the tail. Well, leave out the tail. The barber continues, and immediately the man yells out, ooh, which part now? The ear. Doc, let's do a lion with no ears this time. The barber shakes his head, and once more the needle, and once more the wailing. Where are you now? The belly. I like a lion without a belly. The master lion maker stands for a long time with his fingers in his teeth. Finally, he throws the needle down. No one has ever been asked to do such a thing, to create a lion without a tail or a head or a stomach. God himself could not do it. Brother, stand the pain. Escape the poison of your impulses. The sky will bow to your beauty if you do. A particular glows with the universal. So what does that mean? Someone has decided they want this significant work done and is willing to compromise or abandon every part of that work in order to keep the process pleasant. Now, I want to be very clear. I am not saying put up with environmental toxicity, right? If the tattoo parlor is unsanitary, you get out. But I try to see certain kinds of coding patterns or debugging processes, Jira, as a cost. as this painful particular that I'm able to imbue with meaning if I remember that I have a higher, more universal goal. This whole idea is called psychological flexibility, and it's been studied at length outside of reinterpreted mystic Persian poetry. One technique that's grown up to train people in it is called acceptance and commitment therapy, which essentially emphasizes noticing distress, making decisions based on values, not upon the vagaries of internal events. Maybe your higher value is community or invention or safety, paying it forward, the thing that drives you at your core and is different for everyone. You choose the uncomfortable, inconvenient thing in service of those values. Now, this research on psychological flexibility is specifically carried out in the work context, and the researchers found that people who are less avoidant of distress can also better notice the degree to which they have control in a given situation and innovate their way out. This isn't just saying they realize they have the power to change whatever they put their minds to, no, but it's saying that people can more accurately perceive how much power they do have. It may be more than they think. Another bit of research, this is hot off the presses, code review anxiety. This new study just dropped this week. And in it, I learned I had completely misunderstood anxiety. I'd always thought anxiety meant like feeling afraid or uncomfortable while you did something. And yeah, that's part of it, but it turns out the classic symptom of anxiety is just staying pretty comfortable by simply not doing the thing that would make you upset. So these researchers found that code review anxiety can manifest like this. How many of you are picturing a specific code review that you've been avoiding, like right now? And we know, though, that code reviews promote learning, they reduce defects, all the rest, and we still often don't deeply engage with them. But Dr. Carol Lee, with her research partner, Dr. Kat Hicks at the Developer Success Labs, I referenced them earlier in the belonging research, and you may kind of be wondering if parts of this talk are an elaborate love letter to their labs, and maybe, who can say? But they tried out a single session intervention that worked to reframe typical negative thoughts about code reviews. Like, rather than, if this doesn't work as expected, they're gonna think I'm stupid. Things don't work as expected all the time. It doesn't mean someone's stupid. And they got workshop attendees there by getting them to introspect with questions like, am I perhaps putting unrealistic expectations on myself that I wouldn't put on others? And they found that their targeted one-off workshop reframed apparently very predictable and common negative thoughts, plus had clinically significant positive effects on everyday code review behaviors, making people less avoidant, more engaged. My takeaway here is hope, that anxiety and avoidance in a technical context is not a fixed permanent state, that a specific kind of reframing can transform it. Like, we've got this, we really do. And another curveball for mid-career devs, coming around again, back to belonging. Sometimes when you're trying to add or fix something in a code base that's so different from what you would have chosen, it kind of pushes at you. Like, if you assume that your differences come from a difference in values, that's one of those data points that can make you feel like these people don't care about the things I care about, so I don't belong. And presenting your side, especially if you're the first or only voice, can feel really isolating. One example, I'm the only one on my team who hates trailing closures. I hate them. See, we write a lot of Swift in our iOS app, and one of the most beautiful things about Swift to me is that you can use argument labels. So instead of do the thing, true, false, 5, 17, you get do the thing, active, true, logged in, false, retry 5, timeout 17. And it is lovely, it is understandable at the call site, but then a trailing closure barges in and is like, and some executable statements. So when is this code run? We have to go look at the function signature. My colleagues argue that trailing closures are the future, that they're all over Apple's API designs. We are writing an app in their ecosystem. We need to get used to it. Yeah, well, if Apple jumped off a bridge, would you do it too? Probably. But when we talked about it, I realized I don't actually hate all trailing closures. I just hate the ones like my example here, where there's no context for these executable statements. But the context doesn't have to live in a label. So we agreed as a team, if there's no label, that context has to be in the function name. And if we can't name a function appropriately, then yes, we will add the labels back. I wanted to be assured that we wouldn't sacrifice clarity on the altar of consistency. My colleagues wanted to be assured that I wasn't going to utterly reject Apple's API guidance while we're kind of living in their house. We emphasized different values, and we came to a new answer together. Having different perspectives makes a team better. The team needs you because they don't place the same emphasis on things that you do. Who would be a stickler for tests if it weren't for you? Who would be pedantic about move semantics? If you keep offering your thoughts and get utterly ignored, like shut down, that's something wrong with the environment. That is back to that toxicity. The way people respond to your differences, it really makes or breaks it. But the fact of the difference itself is not a sign that you shouldn't be there. It may, in fact, be why they hired you. An entire class of ongoing tensions is between the purist and the pragmatist on multiple axes, like, let's get everything right. What if we shipped it? And we all come down on different sides of this depending on the situation, right? And we are all most comfortable when everyone holds exactly to our standards, because anyone more lax than me is sloppy and anyone more stringent than me is paranoid. I even saw this in a guitar finger-picking book in the Picking Philosophies section. It's okay to just skim this imagined exchange. I'll read the best bit that's at the bottom. I knew I was gonna need a bigger cup. Classical players are deliberate and precise, uptight, while folk players tend to be more casual and adventurous, slobs. This is from Bruce Emery, the skeptical guitarist, his book Fingerstyle Guitar from Scratch. Now, there is absolutely a time and a place for extreme robustness in our code as well. There's a time for adventuresome casual code, and that's the code that will often propel scientific research forward, like prototypes. And there's a time for deliberation and precision, like my friend Scott and his massive databases. Respecting the differences among these roles is what keeps healthy tension healthy. Now, this next section doesn't fit neatly into any early, mid, late career categories, so we're off into an aside that unfortunately deeply cross-cuts our full professional lives. And here I'm talking about burnout, which is tough to talk about. And it's not a day-to-day situational kind of feeling, right? You can't just take a deep breath and be less burned out. Recovering can take months or years, and you look back and you're like, wow, that was not a good place. And there are researchers who focus their entire careers on measuring burnout, and they've identified 3 classic axes that correlate highly with burnout. The first is exhaustion. That's the one people usually think of. Exhaustion is statements like, I feel used up at the end of the workday. It can be having more demands than you can reasonably meet. This is an area where I am so grateful for my team culture. I can leave for an evening, come back in the morning, and not have missed any critical messages in Slack. Weekends too. My team is senior enough to know what needs urgency and what doesn't, and most things kind of don't. And I strongly believe that this is not just a warm-hearted culture that wants us to be happy, but a ruthlessly practical business decision. We cannot afford to have any of our team be so exhausted that they burn out. We can't afford to lose the experts who've been around for decades. We can't afford to lose the newer folks who we invest in until they become the experts who've been around for decades. The company has to continue to take care of our energy reserves so it can continue to exist. By this point in my career, I've built up enough social capital that I'm comfortable pushing back about rest. Maybe someone new to your team sends a lot of after-hours, weekend messages. I will step up to explicitly spell out this cultural norm. I'm actually more likely to spell this out if someone outranks me, because one high-ranking person's choices can have a disproportionate effect on the whole team's norms. And this is one that I'm not willing to just let change incidentally. So a new manager may be feeling a lot of responsibility for the team, wanting to be visibly supportive, might say, I'm taking PTO next week, but don't worry, I'll be checking email and Slack. And that's when I will kindly, I think, and probably firmly say, don't do those things. And if you really can't stop yourself, don't tell us. The rest of the team is gonna start thinking that they need to start staying on top of work while they're away too. And the manager might say, oh, I'd never expect that of my team. I think they know that. And that's when I'll keep pushing back because I can't stop stirring the pots. Because that's not how the power dynamic works, right? When you're a manager or a senior engineer or just a really charismatic person on your team that everybody likes, your actions set the standard. Well, sometimes I think of things in my off hours. Great, let's check out delayed send. If the messaging medium you're using doesn't offer delayed send, I would argue it's probably not meant for professional communication, text messages. But we can decide things so quickly when we're just DMing at 8 p.m. Okay, yeah, you are not wrong. But think about who you're excluding from decision making when all the real collaboration happens privately after hours. Now, this is why people make meetings with agendas. They don't want to say, you can participate in this decision if and only if you happen to be online reading your messages at the right time. Now, I'm not saying don't go around and build consensus one-on-one, because that's how a lot of things get done, right? But pay attention to how the timing of your questions affects who gets to be part of that consensus. Plus, engineers at lead levels are often at an area where they're more likely to have kids or aging parents, or both. If your team can say to a solid mid to late career dev that one of the perks of joining your team is that they'll be able to put their kid to bed every night, that is hard to compete with on a recruiting front. Some of you might be staunch feminist allies. I'm actually assuming it's most of you, but many of you might not know how to show it in your professional life because everyone you work with is also a man. Again, just assuming. One very concrete thing that dads in particular can do for greater equality is normalize taking time off for caretaking. Oh, my dad has hip surgery. I'm going to be taking a couple days off to help him out. Oh, baby's due in October. I'll be out for some months for shared family leave. I once saw a senior director, someone I'd never interacted with, who posted in a very wide company Slack channel, thousands of people, hey everyone, I want to call out how great it is that so-and-so came in on his paternity leave to see this project through to the end. And so now literally the beginning of my message history with this person is me saying, no, bad director. Yeah, the fix-it problem. But for real, new dads sometimes get explicitly told that there is nothing they can do to help with a newborn. And I'm sorry, have you met a baby? There is plenty of caregiving work to go around. There is a popular, very fancy baby swing in the States by a brand called 4Moms. And like, what is gendered exactly about putting a baby down in a rocker? And the more fathers, like parents of all genders, but fathers specifically can really tip the scales here, the more you take your full parental leave and are truly offline, the more hiring managers are going to have to just assume that anyone, whether their body is set up to bear children or not, might take several well-earned months away from work to bond with a brand new kid. But your rest doesn't have to just be about fighting nonsense gender-based roles. I once worked on a distributed team that had gotten into the habit of always explaining why we were signing off at the end of the day, like, oh, I have dinner in the city, gotta take the dog for a walk, a cappella group practice. But one coworker, he was on a time zone 3 hours ahead of us, and he'd turned down a calendar invite with, oh, I can't make that, it's after 5 o'clock. I'm like, you can do that? So I've tucked that away since, that let's pick this up first thing tomorrow is actually a complete thought. And I try to normalize that now wherever I go. You don't have to have unbreakable plans to stop work for the day. So that's exhaustion and rest. Another main axis of burnout is cynicism. Cynicism doesn't have to be actual negativity towards your work. It includes indifference. Cynicism can easily be a side effect of exhaustion or powerlessness. You can have too much to do given your resources, and sometimes you can't change the thing you want to for reasons, so you stop caring. It's like an armor against despair. None of this matters anyway, so yeah, I dropped a few balls, it's fine. Now for me, when I feel this utter powerlessness, the only thing that helps is raw data to the contrary. Demonstrating that you do have power and autonomy can keep the intense cynicism at bay. I know I said I wasn't going to advise this, but I do have a coworker whose single-minded response to code that everyone agrees needs to change actually is to rewrite it all till it's not painful anymore. And he is the kindest, most precise chainsaw wielder that I've ever met. So, if you're going to take a chainsaw to your code base, there are a few basic, decent behaviors that my colleague uses that let him get away with actually spending his days ripping things apart and putting them back together. I'm gonna share a couple. The first thing is he owns any fallout. When you've changed a lot of things in a complex system, something's gonna break in a way that you didn't anticipate. Our code base is so cross-platform that our changes can mess up on a system that we don't even locally have hardware for. Your team needs to build in time for you to own finding and fixing any failures. Another thing he does, he will submit, you're amazing, thank you. He will submit a PR with 150 changed files, and the exact same pattern is changed in each of them. There's not a lot of, oh, while I was there, I updated these subtle things too. No, his code reviews, they are so long, but they are gloriously simple. He protects his coworkers' mental reserves by making his PRs as simple as he can. I've only worked at one really large organization, so I'm speaking from one perspective, but the people on my team have been around a long time. I've just hit 5 years and I'm still basically a rookie, which is not even false humility. It's that there's dozens of people with a decade or more years in and another dozen or two with 2 decades or more. So if you are cruel or rude about old code you find, it is awfully likely that the person who wrote it is still there. They know the edge cases they worked around, and I'm so sorry, but they probably also have more social and organizational power than you do. So you have to keep it professionally respectful. So these behaviors can help get you the clout that you'll need to actually responsibly wield the chainsaw. Taking these concrete actions driven by your own values can help alleviate some cynicism and make the code better, which is probably why many of you are here. So that was cynicism. We'll take a look at the last axis of burnout. This is statements like, at my work, I'm confident, I'm effective at getting things done. Now, I'm never sure if I want to ask folks to raise their hands if they agree with this statement, because either it'll be a lot of you, and I'll be like, oh, okay, it's just me then, alone in my struggles. Or it'll be very few of you, and we will have a sobering moment together about the state of our collective craft. But my hypothesis, though, is that many of us do feel ineffective because of the morass of other people's code we have to deal with. So let's talk about some ways that you can respond effectively to the structured cacophony that is your code base. You might say, I can't be effective in this code base, I don't know where anything is. Navigating other people's code is genuinely tricky, and of course it makes you feel less effective. You can't do anything if you can't find anything. You get pushed right along that axis of burnout. A more expert behavior is getting really, really good at navigating. I want to show you a quick example how I use search in my usual IDE, Apple's Xcode, more effectively than 90% of the people I know. You might have terms in your code base that you grep for and get over 100,000 results, like layer if you're in the Photoshop code base. You can narrow this in a couple ways. So this layer is also matching words like player. So what I can do is say, let's switch it from containing to just matching the whole word. Now we're down to 20,000 results. Maybe you're looking for assignments. There's a box all the way down at the end of the search window where you can filter, like on the equals sign. Now we're down to 6,500. Finally, and this is a pain to set up, so most people won't do it until they see someone else using it and realize how much effort it can save them. I know this is true because a friend and colleague who watched a earlier draft of this talk said, oh, right, you keep saying that. I really need to do it. But you can set up advanced search scopes. Like, I just want to see how layers get assigned to in unit tests. So Set this up to match a specific directory. You can exclude things like JavaScript or generated files, and then name your scopes. So when you're searching for how to do something in your tests, you can just narrow exactly there. Many of you do not use Xcode at all, much less capitalize it properly. But these are not exactly like cutting edge search features, right? Whatever your environment is, there is a tool that will give you customized search. RipGrep has tons of options. Set yourself up some aliases. Script if the spirit moves you. Even like github.com has useful searching options. If nothing else here today, get inspired to invest the time to become an expert enough searcher that when people are looking over your shoulder, they see you look things up and say, whoa, stop, how did you get there so fast? Another thing that might make you feel less effective, recompiling takes forever. This is true. It's gonna continue to be true for the foreseeable future, so get good at not doing that. Get different information out of your running program without a recompile by getting really good with breakpoints. You don't need to add a print statement. You can add logging from a breakpoint. You can hit a breakpoint, change your value at runtime in LLDB. You've got some lines that you meant to comment out and you forgot. In Xcode and Visual Studio, you can literally like click and drag the instruction pointer past whatever code you wanted to skip. It often works. Now this next coping technique I developed when I was parenting babies who were waking up at all hours of the night, and my short-term memory was absolutely Swiss cheese. I write down all of my hypotheses. Because so often you'll think, oh, I bet it's this dinglehopper that's jamming things up. But in order to test that, you need to get like other ducks in a row. And now by the time you recompile, you build, you run, you get it into the right state and you forget what you were curious about in the first place. Or maybe you remember and you say, okay, was I expecting this to be the same if my hypothesis was true or different? Was it the same or different? Now, your hand-built personal guidebook of hypotheses will steer you true. And it also guards better against interruptions. It's like turning your whole process into one that's tail recursive. Your one stack frame, your recent hypothesis note, has everything you need to just keep going again. So you can do this similarly for planned breaks, like your nights and your weekends, right? I call this parking on a downhill slope. Anything that makes it easier to just get started next time. So if you think like, oh, I know just what to do next at 4:30 p.m., great, write it all down and stop. Because it always takes a bit to get back into the groove of coding, whether your project is easy or hard. And when you're working in a large, often unintuitive code base, it can take so much time to page all of that context back into memory. So before I leave my keyboard, even for a coffee break, honestly, I leave myself a keyword and a checklist in the middle of my CPP file, because I'm not fool enough to type into headers that I don't have to. I get back to my desk, and I find this list laid out like a treasure map, and I'm like, I love you, past me. And I know that you love me too, because you knew exactly what to try next, and what state the branch was in, and time traveled basically forward to current me for this nice, smooth handoff. When you write your lists, you're gonna think you're leaving too much detail, but coming back to your work and knowing exactly which function you were suspicious of and why is gold. One of my favorite questions came from my coworker, Ronnie, who's a brilliant principal engineer at Adobe. We brought her in to assist on a new, simple feature extension that turned out to be full of complicated edges, and she said, okay, start by telling me what file and class we're working in. I'll familiarize myself with it during my day tomorrow, and then we'll talk about strategies. She's extremely senior, and one of the ways that she showed that was by shortcutting the process of getting oriented to a new problem and explicitly allocating enough time to learn before coming back together to talk solutions. It's like when I walk into my local home improvement store. I've heard they're called ironmongers here, which is just a delightful word. I've noticed that the person at the front will often ask, can I help you find anything? And I used to assume that this question was kind of talking down to me, that they doubted that I knew what I was doing. So I'd say, nope, I got it. And I'd wander the store as purposefully as I could. But then I went a couple times with my dad, who's a super handy person. Like, he shows up for charity construction projects, ends up training teams of volunteers. I think his current project is like dredging a lake to fix a sluice at Scout Camp. He definitely stays busy when he visits my house. And man, when he walks into the store, he greets the staff and says, "We're looking for shims." And they say, "Aisle 14, left side." And he doesn't even break stride. Like, this orienting discussion is an essential part of how experts save their energy for tackling problems that only they can solve. They're more effective, so they might be less exhausted. Like, these systems that contribute to burnout are all very interconnected. All this is to say, pay attention to the symptoms and causes of burnout. Just like you don't ignore carpal tunnel syndrome symptoms, right? Those twinges in your wrist. Like, when something is threatening your physical ability to type, you take action, right? Use similar urgency for your mental health. I can't speak yet to truly late career. I'm not there yet. When I'm in my 70s, this conference will still be going. Please invite me back. I will drop some real wisdom. But for now, I'm just going to talk about later. A feeling that cropped up that surprised me was wistfulness. Like, why can't this be a nice code base like everyone else's? See, I'd imagined that coding at a more senior level was like being a landscape architect at a well-established estate. And like, me and the other architects would just look out proudly at what we've built, sometimes maybe tweak a soaker hose, but mostly just cheers with sweet iced tea as we continue to make a well-functioning system function even better. How many of you thought that that's what being a senior engineer would be like? Most of us are in a different reality. Here's what Sarah May, another brilliant engineer, said about this. 2 kinds of companies, some with consistent architectures, some still in business. If we are working on a shipping product, we are constantly bridging and tunneling and leaping across awkward architecture gaps. I personally am almost never working in a perfectly consistent field. I have to go through 17 steps in unrelated systems to get at the root cause. In my garden metaphor, it's like if I need to investigate why the grafted branches we've added on this one apple tree keep failing, and I realize, oh, there's a microclimate that's too soggy here. I can fix that. I just need to I need to patch the irrigation system. The parts I need are in this utilities shed. Like, oh wow, they're really buried in here. People added a bunch of stuff in this utilities.h. I don't know if that's what coding feels like to you sometimes. Also, when the apple tree is responsible for millions of dollars of annual revenue. But we don't perceive the parts that are working well. Like, I don't stop to appreciate that my house no longer has this fire-prone knob and tube wiring. I do notice the old mail slot that we really should insulate, because that might be where the spiders are coming from. But what I'd advise here is to take a minute to make yourself see what works. Maybe it means watching a video tutorial someone outside your company made on using your product. Maybe it's looking at past release notes. The marketing team probably added a bunch of bullet points, unless you're an iOS app, and then you get like bug fixes and performance improvements. But there is a lot of stuff that is truly good about your app, especially when people are mad and yelling, right? Because you know the angriest users are the ones who get the most value from your software, right? Because they have the most to lose when a bug gets in their way. Because so much of the software works so well, so much of the time. And I know it doesn't always help in the moment when you're digging around in the utility shed, but taking that moment to realize, hey, the reason that we can't just regrade the whole lot is because there's a dozen mature trees in the way, it helps. It helps to remember that we are working around these very inconvenient parts because they are useful and valuable. Another thing that can happen to folks later in their careers is a really intense desire and ability to control other people's code. I wanted to call this section domineering, and then I realized people might feel too called out. And this is way too common for me to walk around being rude about it. So I called it influence, because that allows a whole range. You are at a level now where there's code that you wrote a decade or two ago, and some upstart has come in and wants to change it. Now, you know it needs to change, right? But then it will no longer be your code. It will become other people's code. And as someone who's been on the team long enough to have written the legacy code, you have the professional power to stop them. Do you take it? How much do you stop what you're doing with your current feature to try to influence their direction? I worked at a medium-small startup one time where a series of cascading failures ended up deleting the production database and some recent backups. And the customer service director, who oversaw the response while the back-end folks scrambled to restore things, said to us after it was over, "Don't ever do that again." But I'm glad this happened now at the size that we are, because this was actually a really valuable test of our client support system. Maybe some upstarts doing it wrong isn't actually the worst outcome for your product. Think of the skills that you learned and the behaviors you adopted when you took on something that was a stretch for you that you made mistakes on. You developed maybe a new insistence on robust tests. You now have a visceral understanding for why certain things are very complicated for reasons. You probably got pretty decent at justifying decisions to senior leadership. You desperately want your teammates to get very, very good at these things. You can mitigate the most catastrophic effects, please do, but let the team own some decisions, handle the consequences, and grow to make better decisions next time, because that is a lot of what is standing between you and your iced tea. Last, later career point, and then we'll go to a conclusion. You get to a point where you learn a new tool, you create a cool little demo, and people are like, "You should present that." And maybe many of you super don't want to. And if that's you, I'm sure you have excellent reasons, but please hear me out, because I want to nudge you a little bit. Because I want to see more people like me giving talks, more women. I can count on 2 hands now, after Invol's Keynote, the number of conference talks I've been to that have passed my version of the conference Bechdel test, which is where a female attendee asks a question of a female speaker, and neither is me. I want to see more people not like me giving talks, right? More people of color, more trans people, more first-time talk givers who did not, in primary school, do thespians. I want to see them up here. So I'm an experienced speaker more than many programmers. So I'm going to be the expert whose shoulder you look over here and tell you my behaviors and mindsets that make any of this work. Hand to God, the reason that I decided I could give my first public talk was because I saw another woman stand up and give a talk that was absolutely average. And I thought, oh, I can do that. So now, one of the ways that I genuinely cope with my pre-presentation jitters is reminding myself, hey, if it goes bad out there, I bet someone else will say, dang, I could do that. They'll submit. They'll absolutely kill it. I'm gonna be so proud. Don't tell me if you do that. Another maybe surprising perspective, conferences take a lot of social energy, right? And you might think, oh, I'm an introvert. I can't get up in front of a bunch of people. But guess what? The energy is different from stage. Because, I am alone up here. I have near full control over my environment. I can take a good long time to get to my next thought. No one's gonna rush me. And if someone wants to interrupt or interject something rude, someone else, probably in a green shirt, is gonna handle that for me. They're not gonna give you a mic. Now, this is not like low energy, right? But if back and forth conversation makes you nervous, this is a great place to be. Plus, if you kind of like talking to people, but you're not always sure how to approach them and start a conversation, after you've given a talk at a conference, people start coming up to you. They pick up so much of that social burden. It is great. They self-select to talk to you based on something they've already figured out that you have in common. A lot of times, they'll even have a conversation topic just ready to go. If you like being able to kind of anonymously hide at a conference, this is not a good choice, I will give you that. But conversation starting is so much easier after you've given your talk than before. I swear to you, it is a conference social cheat code. Also, we're back, it turns out, at belonging again. Because another benefit of being on stage, you get a lot of concrete signals that you belong. Event organizers remind you to make your travel arrangements. They put your name on a t-shirt. And just before you start, this is real, you wonder if it's all been a terrible mistake. But then an entire room of people, an entire team of people arrange this entire room of furniture to make it abundantly clear that there is time and space for you. When I'm here, it is more clear than anywhere else that it is my turn to talk and I do belong. All right, I'm gonna highlight the behaviors again that I think will help your re-entry post-conference in a few days. Look over a shoulder. Learn those behaviors that make experts efficient. Get good at orientation and navigation. Honing those skills will serve you in every code base you ever visit. You'll feel more effective because you'll be more effective. If and when you break out the chainsaw on a large-scale refactors, if you're considerate enough, your team might actually start asking you to do them more. Please protect your time to rest and reset. And if you've got any influence, and I know a lot of you do, use it to protect your teammates' downtime too. Spend time with your kids in a way that takes you away from work. That is not restful, I'll give you that. But make it clear that this is a normal thing that very senior men in the workplace do too. Make it not a big deal. Scrape what you can and paint over the rest because you have finite resources. And I know you want to chase down every last detail because you take pride in doing good work, but you must not drop the baby. When you've gotten up somewhere, leave the ladder behind you. And like Felix told us at the beginning of day one, leave a space for the new person before they even walk up to your circle. We've got to make a lot more room for a lot more people, not just in our conversations, but in the foundations of architecture and on stages around the world. Closing metaphor. You may have heard of Chesterton's fence, the idea that if you see a fence and you don't know why it's there, do not remove it. This is a humble and curious way to approach unknowns. And that humble curiosity has its place. Many senior devs, though, we do have enough context to accurately judge that this fence is in the wrong spot. Or if it's in the right spot, it's made of the wrong materials, the lumber wasn't rated for ground contact because this is amateur hour. It's not actually hubris, you're right. And you'll still choose to leave it be. You might even work this janky fence into your new plans because looking at the whole, evaluating this particular component in terms of its role in your big picture goals at the product level, at the company level, at the personal level, at the societal level, it means letting some things go unfixed. And hold on to that thought that every particular is in service of your much larger goals. And as you go back to your own projects and jobs, I I hope the perspectives from this talk will ease your reentry so you can stay in the game, keep building on top of, around, and beyond other people's code. Thank you.